Our/pettyrevenge son picked grandma over me, so I let her raise him alone. I hate you. Grandma would never make me do this stupid chore. She says you're just being mean because you're bitter about the divorce. I stood in the doorway of my 12-year-old son's disaster zone of a bedroom, holding a trash bag and staring at him in complete disbelief. We'd been having the same fight for the third time this week. I'd asked him to clean his room, and he'd immediately launched into his well-rehearsed speech about how unfair I was compared to his beloved grandmother. Excuse me? I said, my voice dangerously quiet. What did you just say to me? Dylan crossed his arms defiantly, his chin jutting out in that stubborn way that reminded me painfully of his father. Grandma Carol says you only make me do chores because you're taking out your anger on me. She says divorced moms do that sometimes because they're sad about being alone. The trash bag crinkled in my grip as my hands clenched. 3 years. 3 years since the divorce, and my ex-mother-in-law had been systematically undermining every single parenting decision I made. When I grounded Dylan for failing a test, he'd call Grandma Carol crying, and she'd show up an hour later with ice cream and lectures about how boys will be boys. When I took away his video games for talking back, she'd let him play at her house all weekend and send him home with new games. Dylan, you will clean this room, and then we're going to have a conversation about respect. No. He stomped his foot like a toddler. I don't have to listen to you. Grandma says I can come live with her anytime I want because she actually cares about me. She doesn't try to control everything I do. Something snapped inside my chest. Not broke, snapped. Like a rubber band stretched too far. Is that what you want? I asked, my voice eerily calm. To live with Grandma? Dylan's eyes lit up. Yeah. She lets me stay up late and eat whatever I want, and she doesn't give me stupid chores. She says kids should be kids. And you think that would be better than living here with me? Way better. He was gaining confidence now, probably thinking he'd found the magic words to get out of cleaning his room. Grandma Carol is nice to me. She doesn't yell all the time like you do. I nodded slowly, processing this. 3 years of trying to raise a respectful, responsible human being while fighting against someone who undermined me at every turn. 3 years of being painted as the villain while she got to be the hero swooping in with treats and permissiveness. Okay, I said simply. Dylan blinked, confused by my sudden agreement. Okay? You want to live with Grandma Carol? Fine. Let's make that happen. Wait, what do you mean? I was already moving, pulling a suitcase from the closet. You've made it very clear that you think she's a better parent than me. So let's test that theory. I started throwing clothes into the suitcase. You can live with her. Full time. Mom, I just meant. No, Dylan. You've told me repeatedly that you hate it here, that I mean, that Grandma would do things better. So let's see how much you love it when she's the one making sure you do homework every night and brush your teeth and get to school on time. Dylan's face was starting to shift from defiant to uncertain. I didn't mean forever. Pack your things, I said, my voice steady as steel. We're going to Grandma's house. The drive to Carol's house was dead silent except for Dylan's occasional sniffles from the passenger seat. Every few minutes, I'd catch him glancing at me out of the corner of my eye, probably waiting for me to crack and turn around. But I kept driving, my hand steady on the wheel, 3 suitcases and 2 boxes of his belongings packed in the back of my Honda. Mom, he finally whispered as we pulled into Carol's subdivision. Maybe we should talk about this more. Oh, now you want to talk? I kept my voice neutral. Funny how that works. Carol's house sat at the end of a cul-de-sac, perfectly manicured lawn, decorative flags hanging from the porch. The same porch where she'd stood 3 months ago, hands on her hips, telling me I was too hard on Dylan after I grounded him for breaking curfew. The same woman who'd told my son that divorce made mothers emotional and irrational. I parked and started unloading his stuff before I could second-guess myself. What are you doing? Carol appeared in her doorway, wearing her usual cardigan and pearls, her silver hair perfectly styled even though it was barely noon. Dylan has something to tell you, I called out, hefting his computer tower from the trunk. Don't you, sweetheart? Dylan shuffled up the walkway, looking smaller somehow than he had in his bedroom 20 minutes ago. Grandma. I was wondering if, maybe I could stay with you for a while? Carol's face immediately brightened, and she shot me a triumphant look. Of course, darling. You know you're always welcome here. How long were you thinking? Permanently, I answered for him, dragging a suitcase up the front steps. Dylan's made it very clear that my parenting style doesn't work for him. He thinks you'd do a much better job raising him, so I'm giving you the chance. The color drained from Carol's face. Now wait just a minute, Jennifer. No, Carol. You wait. I dropped the suitcase with a thud. For 3 years, you've been telling my son that he doesn't have to listen to me, that I'm too strict, that you'd handle things differently. You've undermined every boundary I've set and convinced him that I'm the problem. So congratulations. He's all yours. But I didn't mean. Carol looked frantically between Dylan and me. I can't just. I'm 68 years old. I'm not equipped to. To what? Raise a child? I smiled sweetly. But you've been telling Dylan for years how much better you are at this than me. Surely you weren't lying to him? Dylan was looking back and forth between us like he was watching a tennis match, and I could see the reality starting to dawn on his face. This wasn't going to be an extended sleepover with unlimited video games and junk food. Jennifer, be reasonable, Carol said, her voice taking on a pleading tone I'd never heard before. I love Dylan, but full-time parenting is different than swooping in to undermine the actual parent and then disappearing when things get difficult. I finished. You're absolutely right. It is different. I headed back to the car for the last box. Dylan's bedtime is 9 p.m. on school nights. He has a math test Friday he hasn't studied for. He needs to brush his teeth twice a day, you'll have to remind him because he forgets. Oh, and he's been lying about finishing his homework, so you'll want to check that every night. Carol's mouth opened and closed like a fish. I'll send over his pediatrician's information and school emergency contact forms tomorrow, I continued cheerfully. Have fun, you too. I made it exactly 3 blocks before I had to pull over. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely grip the steering wheel, and suddenly I couldn't breathe. What had I just done? I'd literally just abandoned my child at his grandmother's house like he was a stray cat I couldn't handle anymore. The rational part of my brain kept insisting this was temporary, a wake-up call, a lesson that needed to be learned. But the mother part of my brain was screaming that I'd just made the biggest mistake of my life. My phone buzzed. Carol. I stared at it for a long moment, then declined the call. It buzzed again immediately. Then again. On the fourth call, I finally answered. What, Carol? Jennifer, you get back here right now and pick up your son. Her voice was shrill, panicked. You can't just dump him on me like this. I'm not dumping him, I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. I'm giving you what you've always wanted, the chance to parent Dylan your way, without my interference. This is insane. I'm calling your ex-husband. Go ahead, I said. But last I checked, Richard was too busy with his new family in Portland to take custody. That's why Dylan's been with me for 3 years, remember? The line went quiet except for Carol's heavy breathing. He's crying, she said finally, and I felt like someone had punched me in the stomach. He's upstairs crying and asking for you. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to turn the car around. But I forced myself to remember this morning, the contempt in Dylan's voice, the way he'd weaponized Carol's words against me, the 3 years of fighting for basic respect in my own home. Then comfort him, I said. That's what parents do. Jennifer, please. I hung up and turned off my phone. The house felt like a museum when I walked through the front door. Too quiet, too clean, too empty. I'd been fantasizing about this silence for months, no video games blaring, no arguing about chores, no constant background noise of a preteen who seemed determined to push every boundary I set. Now the silence felt suffocating. I made myself a cup of coffee and sat at my kitchen table, staring at the chair where Dylan usually sat, leaving crumbs, and complaining about whatever I'd made for breakfast. The morning felt like it had happened a year ago instead of 2 hours ago. My phone was still buzzing on the counter where I'd left it, the screen lighting up with Carol's name over and over again. By evening, she'd called 37 times. I finally turned the phone back on around 8 p.m. and found a series of increasingly frantic voicemails. Jennifer, this is ridiculous. He won't eat the dinner I made. He's asking for his special pillow, the one with the dinosaurs? Where is it? How do you get him to take a shower? He says he doesn't have to listen to me. Jennifer, I mean it, you need to come get him. He's being completely defiant about bedtime and I don't know what to do. The last one, left just 10 minutes ago, he locked himself in the bathroom and won't come out. I'm too old for this. Please. I deleted all the messages without responding. At 9:30, a text from Dylan's number, Mom, please come get me. Then another, I'm sorry. Then, Grandma is crying. I turned the phone face down and went to bed in my perfectly quiet house, trying to ignore the Dylan-shaped hole in my chest. I woke up at 3 a.m. to the sound of pounding on my front door. For a split second, my sleep-addled brain thought it was Dylan coming home, and relief flooded through me. Then reality crashed back. Dylan didn't have keys anymore, and the pounding was too aggressive, too frantic. I stumbled to the window and peered through the blinds. Carol's white Buick was parked crooked in my driveway, 2 wheels on the grass. She was still in her nightgown with a coat thrown over it, her usually perfect hair wild around her face. Jennifer. Open this door right now. Her voice was hoarse, desperate. I considered pretending I wasn't home, but she'd clearly seen my bedroom light flip on. With a sigh, I wrapped my robe around me and trudged to the front door. It's 3 in the morning, Carol. I don't care what time it is. She pushed past me into my living room, and I could see she'd been crying. You have to take him back. I can't do this anymore. It's been less than 24 hours. 24 hours too many. She whirled around to face me, her voice climbing toward hysteria. Do you have any idea what your son put me through today? He refused to go to school. Refused? I had to physically drag him to the car, and then he jumped out at a red light and walked home. I blinked. He walked? That's 4 miles. 4 miles of me driving behind him at 5 miles per hour, begging him to get back in the car while other drivers honked at me. Carol's hands were shaking. When we finally got home, he told me he was hungry, so I made him a sandwich. You know what he did? He took 1 bite and threw it in the garbage. Said it wasn't the right kind of bread. Despite everything, I felt a flicker of dark satisfaction. What did you do? I made him another sandwich. With different bread. Carol's voice got smaller. And he threw that one away too. Said he wasn't hungry anymore and went upstairs to play video games. Did you let him? The guilty look on her face was answer enough. Carol, you can't just give him whatever he wants when he throws a tantrum. That's literally the opposite of parenting. But he was so upset. And I didn't know what else to do. She collapsed onto my couch like her strings had been cut. Then at dinner, he said my cooking was gross and asked me to order pizza. So I did. Then he complained that I got the wrong toppings. I sat down across from her, feeling strangely calm. What happened at bedtime? Bedtime? Carol laughed, but there was no humor in it. He informed me that 9 p.m. was too early and that you let him stay up until 11 on school nights. I don't. I know that now. When I tried to insist, he started screaming that I was being mean just like you, and how he thought I was different, and why was every adult in his life so horrible. Carol's voice cracked. So I let him stay up. He was still awake at midnight playing those awful video games. And this morning? This morning he came downstairs and announced he wasn't going to school because it was stupid and that he decided he wanted to go back home to you. Carol looked up at me with desperate eyes. So I told him that was wonderful news, and you know what he said? I waited. He said never mind, he'd rather stay here where nobody tells him what to do. Carol buried her face in her hands. Jennifer, I created a monster. No, I said quietly. We both did. The difference is I was trying to fix it. I can't handle him. I thought parenting was supposed to be about love and support and making children feel special. It is. But it's also about boundaries and consequences and teaching them that the world doesn't revolve around them. I leaned back in my chair. Things you actively prevented me from doing. Carol was quiet for a long moment. He asked for you 17 times yesterday. My chest tightened, but I kept my voice steady. What did you tell him? That you were taking a little break and he should try to have fun with me. She looked up. He said it wasn't fun anymore. The next morning brought a call from Dylan's school. Mrs. Patterson? This is Principal Martinez. Dylan didn't show up for first period, and when we called the emergency contact number, we reached a very distraught older woman who said she couldn't find him. I closed my eyes, sitting in my empty kitchen with my coffee growing cold. He's staying with his grandmother temporarily. What do you mean she couldn't find him? Well, she seemed quite upset. She said he left the house this morning with his backpack, but the school bus driver says he never got on. We've tried calling his father, but his father lives in Portland. I rubbed my temples. Did you try Dylan's cell phone? It goes straight to voicemail. Mrs. Patterson, I have to ask, is everything all right at home? Dylan's teachers have noticed some behavioral changes lately, and now with him missing school. Missing school. My 12-year-old was now officially a truant, and it had been exactly 36 hours since I dropped him at Carol's. I'll handle it, I said. I'll find him and make sure he's in school tomorrow. But when I hung up, I just sat there staring at my phone. Where would Dylan go? He didn't really have friends. We'd moved to this district after the divorce, and he'd spent most of his free time either at my house complaining or at Carol's being spoiled. He didn't know the area well enough to get far on foot. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Mom, it's Dylan. Borrowed phone from library. Can you pick me up? The public library was 12 blocks from Carol's house. He'd walked 12 blocks instead of going to school, then sat in the library all morning rather than face another day with his grandmother. I stared at the text for a full 5 minutes before responding. Ask Grandma Carol to pick you up. The response came immediately. She doesn't know where I am. Please, Mom. Then call her. I don't want to. She cried all morning and it was weird. I could picture it, Carol, overwhelmed and exhausted, probably crying over her coffee while Dylan ate cereal and realized that his perfect grandmother was just as human and flawed as everyone else. The fantasy was cracking, but instead of learning from it, he was trying to escape back to me. You made your choice, Dylan. Figure it out. I turned off my phone before I could see his response. 20 minutes later, Carol's car pulled into my driveway again. This time Dylan was in the passenger seat, slumped down like he was trying to hide. Carol got out first, her movements sharp and agitated. He called me from some library, she announced the moment I opened the door. Do you know he's been lying to me about everything? His favorite foods, his bedtime, what shows he's allowed to watch, everything. Dylan shuffled up behind her, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. His hair was messy, his clothes wrinkled, and there were dark circles under his eyes like he hadn't slept. Mom? His voice was tiny, uncertain. Can we talk? You can talk to Grandma Carol, I said, not moving from the doorway. She's your guardian now. But I want to talk to you. And I wanted a son who respected me. We don't always get what we want. Carol stepped between us, her face flushed. Jennifer, this has gone far enough. I'm bringing him back. I can't do this anymore. You don't get to just quit when things get hard, Carol. That's not how parenting works. I'm not his parent, you are. Then you should have thought of that before you spent 3 years telling him he didn't have to listen to me. The standoff lasted another 10 seconds before Dylan broke. I'm sorry, he burst out, tears streaming down his face. I'm sorry I said those things. I didn't mean it about wanting to live with Grandma forever. I just wanted you to stop being mad at me about my room. Every maternal instinct I possessed was screaming at me to hug him, to bring him inside, to fix this. But I forced myself to stay in the doorway, arms crossed, watching my son fall apart on my front porch. You told me I was a terrible mother, I said quietly. You told me Grandma Carol would do a better job raising you. So let her raise you. But she can't. Dylan's voice cracked. She doesn't know how to make you stop crying when you have nightmares, and she burns everything she cooks, and she doesn't know that I need my fan on to sleep, and he hiccuped through his sobs. She's not you. Carol's face crumpled. Nightmares? What nightmares? Dylan, honey, why didn't you tell me you were having nightmares? Dylan wiped his nose on his sleeve, looking between us desperately. I have them sometimes. About Dad leaving. Mom always makes me warm milk and sits with me until I fall back asleep. He looked at me with devastated eyes. But when I asked Grandma to do it, she said warm milk was silly and I should just go back to bed. I didn't know, Carol whispered. You should have explained. I shouldn't have to explain. Dylan's voice rose, some of his old defiance flickering back. Mom just knows. She knows I hate the crusts on sandwiches and that I need to check the locks twice before bed because of my anxiety and that math makes me feel stupid, so she helps me with homework even when she's tired from work. He whirled back to me. I didn't mean those things, I said. I was just mad about cleaning my room. So you thought you'd hurt me as much as possible to get out of 20 minutes of picking up your clothes, I said, and Dylan flinched like I'd slapped him. I didn't think you'd actually make me leave. What did you think would happen, Dylan? That you could keep treating me like garbage and I'd just take it forever? Carol stepped forward, her face pale. Jennifer, I need to tell you something. Yesterday afternoon, Dylan asked me why I always told him those things about you. Why I said you were too strict and that divorced mothers were emotional. I looked at her sharply. And? He said sometimes he felt bad about complaining to me when you were just trying to help him be good. But that I always agreed with him that you were wrong, so he figured it must be true. Carol's voice was barely audible. He asked me if I really thought you were a bad mother. The words hit me like a physical blow. Dylan had been confused, looking for guidance, and Carol had validated every bratty impulse instead of helping him understand that discipline came from love. What did you tell him? I asked. I couldn't answer. Because looking at him yesterday, really looking at how he behaved when he didn't get his way, I realized what I'd done. Carol's eyes filled with tears. I turned him against his own mother because I wanted to be the favorite. I wanted to be the one he ran to, the one he loved most. Dylan was staring at his grandmother with a mix of confusion and betrayal. You mean Mom isn't really mean? You were lying? Not lying exactly, Carol said miserably. But I was wrong. So very wrong. Why would you do that? Dylan's voice was small, lost. Why would you make me think my mom was bad when she wasn't? The question hung in the air like a blade, cutting through years of manipulation and poisoned words. Carol had no answer, and Dylan was looking back and forth between us like his entire world had shifted on its axis. Which, I suppose, it had. I stood there watching my son process the magnitude of Carol's betrayal, and despite everything, my heart broke for him. The confusion on his face was devastating, learning that the adult he trusted had been systematically poisoning him against his own mother. Dylan, I said softly, go wait in Grandma's car for a minute. We need to talk. He looked like he wanted to protest, but something in my tone must have warned him this wasn't the time. He trudged back to the Buick, shoulders hunched. Carol and I stared at each other across my doorway. You destroyed my relationship with my son, I said, my voice deadly calm. For 3 years, you made me the villain in his story so you could be the hero. Do you have any idea what that did to me? Jennifer, I'm so sorry. Sorry doesn't fix this, Carol. Sorry doesn't give me back the bedtime stories he stopped wanting because you told him I was controlling his schedule. Sorry doesn't undo the Mother's Day when he made you a card instead of me because you convinced him I didn't deserve one after grounding him. Carol's face went white. He told you about the card? He didn't have to. I saw it on your refrigerator when I picked him up. The memory still stung like a fresh wound. My own son, making Mother's Day cards for his grandmother because she'd convinced him his actual mother was the enemy. I never meant for it to go that far. What did you mean for, exactly? I stepped closer, and Carol instinctively backed up. What was the endgame here, Carol? Did you think you'd eventually get custody? That Dylan would choose you over me permanently? I miss being needed, she whispered. After Richard moved away, and then you got divorced, I felt so useless. When Dylan would call me crying about chores or punishments, it felt good to be the one who could fix things. By undermining his mother. I told myself I was protecting him from your anger about the divorce. My anger? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Carol, I wasn't angry about the divorce. I was relieved. Your son was cheating on me with his secretary, very original, by the way. I was angry about single parenting a preteen while fighting against you at every turn. But Richard said whatever made him look less like the villain in his own story. I shook my head. Just like you've been doing with Dylan. We both looked toward the car where Dylan sat hunched in the passenger seat, probably straining to hear our conversation. He can't stay with me, Carol said finally. I know that now. I'm not equipped for this, and honestly, he doesn't respect me at all anymore. When I try to set boundaries, he just laughs. Congratulations. You've created exactly what you helped him become with me. But I've also ruined everything between you two. Look at him, Jennifer. He's terrified you won't take him back. What if this can't be fixed? The question I'd been avoiding hit me square in the chest. What if I'd pushed too hard? What if Dylan was too hurt by my rejection to ever trust me again? What if Carol was right and I damaged our relationship beyond repair? That's not your concern anymore, I said, but my voice wavered slightly. Jennifer, please. I know I don't deserve to ask for anything, but he needs his mother. And despite what I did, I can see how much you love him. Love him? I felt tears threatening. Carol, I've loved that boy every single day of his life. Even when he was breaking my heart with your poison words, even when he looked at me like I was his enemy, even when he told me he hated me. That's what made this so unbearable. Carol was crying now, mascara streaking down her cheeks. How do we fix this? I looked at Dylan through the car window. He was watching us intently, his face pressed against the glass, and I could see the fear in his eyes. Fear that I might really be done with him forever. I don't know if we can. We have to try, Carol said, wiping her eyes with a tissue from her purse. Jennifer, I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. I was about to respond when Dylan suddenly bolted from the car, running toward us with panic written all over his face. Mom, please don't send me away, he sobbed, throwing himself at my legs. I heard you say it might not be fixable. I'll be good, I promise. I'll clean my room every day and I won't complain about chores ever again. The feel of his arms around me was like coming home and being stabbed at the same time. I wanted to hold him, but I couldn't let myself soften yet. Not when we hadn't actually addressed anything. Dylan, go back to the car. No. He looked up at me with red, swollen eyes. Everyone keeps making decisions about me without asking what I want. Dad left without asking if I wanted him to go. Grandma told me all that stuff about you without asking if I wanted to hear it. And now you're sending me away without asking if I learned my lesson. This isn't about learning a lesson, I said, trying to pry his hands off my waist. This is about consequences. You can't just say you're sorry and expect everything to go back to normal. But what else can I do? His voice cracked with desperation. I can't undo what I said. I can't make Grandma unsay all those things about you. I'm 12, I don't know how to fix grown-up problems. Carol stepped forward hesitantly. Dylan, honey, maybe you should give your mom some space to think. You don't get to talk. Dylan whirled around to face her, and I was shocked by the anger in his voice. This is your fault. You made me think my mom was mean when she was just trying to help me. You lied to me. Dylan, Carol started. You told me divorced moms were crazy. You told me I didn't have to listen to her. You told me you'd take better care of me than she did. Tears were streaming down his face. But you don't even know how to take care of me at all. You don't know anything about me except that I like video games and candy. The raw pain in his voice was devastating. This wasn't just about discipline anymore. Dylan was grappling with the realization that the adult he trusted most had been manipulating him. I thought you loved me more than Mom did because you were nicer to me, he continued, his voice breaking. But you were just using me? To make her feel bad? Carol looked stricken. No, sweetheart, I do love you. Then why did you try to make me hate my mom? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Carol opened and closed her mouth several times, clearly struggling to find an answer that wouldn't sound horrible. I was jealous, she finally whispered. I was jealous that your mom got to be with you every day, and I only got weekends and phone calls. When you complained to me, it made me feel special, like I was the one who really understood you. Dylan stared at her for a long moment, then turned back to me. Mom, I don't want to live with Grandma anymore. I don't want someone who's nice to me just so I'll like them better than you. That's not real. Despite everything, I felt a flicker of pride. Maybe he was finally starting to understand the difference between discipline that comes from love and indulgence that comes from selfish motives. But understanding didn't automatically fix 3 years of damage. Dylan, it's not just about where you want to live, I said carefully. It's about trust. How do I know that the next time I have to discipline you, you won't just decide you hate me again? His face crumpled, and I realized he didn't have an answer for that. None of us did. 3 weeks later, I was starting to think I'd made a terrible mistake. Dylan was back home. I'd caved after 2 more days of watching him fall apart at Carol's house, but things weren't magically fixed like some after-school special. If anything, they were worse in new and complicated ways. He'd become almost obsessively compliant, which sounds like a good thing until you're living with it. When I asked him to clean his room, he'd spend 3 hours organizing it like a museum display. When I said dinner would be ready in 10 minutes, he'd sit at the table immediately and wait in perfect silence. When his alarm went off for school, he'd be dressed and downstairs before I even got out of bed. Dylan, you don't have to be perfect, I told him one morning as he stood by the door with his backpack at 7:15 a.m., a full 20 minutes before the bus came. You can relax. I don't want you to get mad, he said quietly, not meeting my eyes. I don't want you to send me away again. The words hit me like a slap. He wasn't being good because he'd learned respect, he was terrified I'd abandon him again if he put one foot wrong. And maybe worse than his fearful compliance was the wall he'd built between us. He answered when I spoke to him, did everything I asked, but there was no warmth there. No jokes, no random chatter about his day, no casual physical affection. It was like living with a polite stranger who happened to look exactly like my son. The breaking point came on a Tuesday night when I found him doing homework at the kitchen table at 11 p.m. Dylan, it's way past your bedtime. The math can wait until tomorrow. He looked up with panicked eyes. But I only have 3 problems left, and you said homework comes first, and I don't want you to be disappointed. Honey, stop. I sat down across from him, watching his hands shake slightly as he gripped his pencil. When did you start this homework? Right after school. But I kept messing up the problems and starting over because you always said to do my best work, and my handwriting was sloppy on the first try, so Dylan. I reached across and gently took the pencil from his death grip. You've been doing homework for 6 hours? His chin trembled. I wanted it to be perfect so you wouldn't be upset with me. Looking at his math worksheet, I could see he'd erased and rewritten the same problems multiple times. The paper was thin from all the erasing, and his answers, which were correct, were written in increasingly shaky handwriting. Sweetheart, this work is fine. It was fine 3 hours ago. You don't have to be perfect. Yes, I do, he whispered. Because if I'm not perfect, you'll realize you don't want me here. My heart broke completely in that moment. In trying to teach him consequences, I'd made him believe that my love was conditional on his behavior. That he had to earn his place in his own home. Dylan, look at me. I waited until his scared eyes met mine. I will never send you away again. Never. No matter how many mistakes you make or how messy your room gets or how many times you forget to brush your teeth. But you did send me away, he said, his voice barely audible. You packed all my stuff and you left me there and you wouldn't answer when I called. I know. And I'm sorry. I was so hurt and angry that I wanted you to understand what you were throwing away, but I went too far. Tears started rolling down his cheeks. I thought you didn't love me anymore. Oh, baby. I moved around the table and pulled him into my arms, and for the first time in 3 weeks, he didn't stiffen. I have never stopped loving you. Not for 1 second. Even when I was furious with you, even when you said those awful things, even when I made that terrible decision to leave you at Grandma's, I loved you through all of it. He collapsed against me, and I realized he was sobbing, really sobbing, not just crying. 3 weeks of held back fear and confusion and hurt came pouring out. I was so scared you were done with me forever, he hiccuped into my shoulder. I kept thinking about how mean I was to you and how maybe you realized you'd be happier without me. Never, I whispered fiercely into his hair. You're my son. You're stuck with me for life, even when we're both being idiots. But even as I held him, I knew we weren't out of the woods yet. Carol was still calling daily, begging for a chance to rebuild her relationship with Dylan. My ex-husband had somehow caught wind of the situation and was making noises about unstable parenting environments. And underneath Dylan's fear-based compliance, I could see anger brewing, anger at me for abandoning him, anger at Carol for lying to him, anger at his father for leaving, anger at the whole situation. The explosion was coming. I just didn't know when. The explosion came 3 days later, triggered by something as mundane as a C+ on a history quiz. I found Dylan at the kitchen table, staring at the paper with his shoulders rigid, his hands clenched into fists. Hey, how was school? I asked, setting down groceries. Fine. His voice was tight, controlled. What's that you're looking at? Nothing important. But he didn't move to hide the quiz, and I could see the red grade circled at the top. A C+ isn't the end of the world, Dylan. History's always been tough for you. That's when something in his carefully constructed composure cracked. Right, he said, his voice dripping with bitter sarcasm I'd never heard from him before. It's fine. Everything's fine. Perfect. Dylan got a bad grade, but that's totally okay because Mom loves me no matter what, right? I set down the milk slowly, recognizing the dangerous edge in his tone. Dylan. No, let me guess what happens next, he continued, standing up so fast his chair scraped against the floor. You're going to tell me we'll work on it together. You're going to be all understanding and supportive. Because that's what good moms do, and you're trying really hard to be a good mom now. I've always been trying to be a good mom. Have you? His eyes flashed with something ugly. Because good moms don't abandon their kids when they get angry. Good moms don't pack their son's stuff and dump him at someone else's house like he's a problem to be solved. The words hit exactly where he'd aimed them, and I felt my own anger starting to rise. Dylan, we've talked about this. We've talked about how sorry you are. We've talked about how you'll never do it again. But we haven't talked about how it felt to watch you drive away. His voice was getting louder, months of suppressed emotion finally breaking free. We haven't talked about how I stood at Grandma's window for 2 hours waiting for you to come back. I swallowed hard. You're right. We haven't talked about that. You want to know what the worst part was? Tears were starting to fall, but his voice stayed angry. It wasn't even that you left. It was that you were so calm about it. Like it was easy. Like getting rid of me was just this thing you finally got to do. That's not. It felt like Dad all over again. The words exploded out of him. He left and found a new family that was easier to love. And then you left too, and I thought maybe I'm just this terrible kid that nobody wants to deal with when I'm not being perfect. My heart was breaking, but underneath the pain was a surge of something that might have been relief. This was real emotion, messy and painful and honest, not the careful compliance he'd been showing me for weeks. I'm not your father, Dylan. And what I did wasn't about you being terrible. Then why did you do it? He wiped his nose on his sleeve, glaring at me through his tears. Why was it so easy for you to just leave me there? The question I'd been dreading, the one I wasn't sure I could answer in a way that wouldn't make everything worse. Because I was broken, I said quietly. Because I'd spent 3 years feeling like I was failing as your mother, and when you told me Grandma would do better, part of me believed it. So you just gave up on me? No, Dylan. I gave up on myself. He stared at me, some of the anger flickering into confusion. What does that mean? It means I made a decision based on my hurt feelings instead of what was best for you. It means I was supposed to be the adult, and I failed. The kitchen fell silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and Dylan's shaky breathing. I don't know how to trust you again, he whispered finally. I know, I said. I don't know how to trust myself again either. We stood there in the kitchen, staring at each other across 3 weeks of careful politeness and months of accumulated hurt. Dylan's admission hung between us like a bridge we both wanted to cross but were afraid might collapse. Maybe that's okay, I said finally. Maybe we both need to learn how to trust again, slowly. How do we do that? Before I could answer, my phone rang. Carol's name flashed on the screen, and Dylan's face immediately shuddered. Don't answer it, he said quickly. Dylan, she's been trying to apologize. I don't care. His voice went hard again. I don't want to talk to her. I don't want to see her. I don't want her in our house pretending like she didn't ruin everything. I let the call go to voicemail, but it started ringing again immediately. She's not going to stop, I said. Maybe we should just. No. Dylan's reaction was so violent it startled me. Mom, please. I can't deal with her fake crying and her excuses. Not right now. Not when we're trying to fix us. The phone finally stopped ringing, but I could see the tension in Dylan's shoulders. Carol's presence in our lives was still a source of active stress, even when she wasn't physically here. We're going to have to deal with her eventually, I said gently. She's still your grandmother. She's the person who made me hate my own mom, Dylan said flatly. Why should I forgive her just because she's family? It was a fair question, and one I didn't have a good answer for. How do you rebuild trust with someone who systematically destroyed it for years? My phone buzzed with a text. Then another. Then 5 more in rapid succession. What's she saying? Dylan asked, despite claiming he didn't care. I glanced at the messages, and my stomach dropped. She's having some kind of breakdown. She's saying she can't live with what she's done. That she's destroyed the family. Good, Dylan said viciously. Maybe now she knows how it feels. Dylan. What? Why should I feel bad for her? Did she feel bad when she told me you were just being mean because Dad left? Did she feel bad when she bought me stuff just to make you look cheap? Did she feel bad when she told me I could live with her forever because she'd never make me do chores? Each question hit like a slap, reminding me of moments I tried to forget. The way Dylan would come home from Carol's with expensive toys I couldn't afford, making me look like a stingy parent. The way she'd undermine every rule I set by framing it as unreasonable. She's still a person, Dylan. And people make mistakes. Stop defending her. His anger flared back to life. Why do you always do that? Why do you try to make me be okay with people who hurt us? I'm not defending her. I'm trying to. You did it with Dad too. When he missed my birthday for his new baby, you told me to try to understand his position. When he forgot to call for 3 weeks, you said he was going through a lot with the move. Why do I have to understand everyone else, but nobody has to understand me? The accusation stopped me cold because it was absolutely true. I had spent years making excuses for Richard, trying to soften his neglect so Dylan wouldn't feel completely abandoned by his father. And now I was doing the same thing with Carol. You're right, I said quietly. I do that. I try to protect you from how selfish people can be, but maybe that's not actually protecting you. It's not. It just makes me confused about who I'm supposed to trust. My phone started ringing again. This time it wasn't Carol, it was a number I didn't recognize. Hello? Is this Jennifer Patterson? The voice was official, clipped. This is Officer Martinez with the police department. We have a Carol Williams here who says she's related to you. She's quite upset and asking us to perform a wellness check on a Dylan Patterson. Dylan's eyes went wide, and I felt ice form in my stomach. I'm sorry, what exactly is happening? Ma'am, Mrs. Williams came to the station about an hour ago saying she was worried about her grandson's mental state. She seemed to think he might be in danger. She's requesting we check on him immediately. I looked at Dylan, whose face had gone pale. Officer, Dylan is fine. He's right here with me. There's no emergency. Can I speak with him briefly, just to confirm? I handed Dylan the phone with shaking hands. Carol had actually called the police. She'd escalated our family drama into a legal matter. Hello? Yes, sir, this is Dylan. No, I'm okay. My mom didn't hurt me or anything. Dylan's voice was steady, but I could see his hands trembling. I don't want to see my grandmother right now, but that's my choice, not because anyone's making me. There was a pause as the officer spoke. No, sir, I'm not in any danger. Can you tell her to please stop calling? We just need some space right now. When he hung up, we stared at each other in shock. She called the cops on you, Dylan said slowly. She actually called the cops. And suddenly I realized this was far from over. Carol wasn't just going to accept being cut out of our lives. She was going to fight, and she was going to make it as messy and public as possible. The real battle was just beginning. The police visit was just the beginning. Over the next week, Carol's campaign to insert herself back into our lives became increasingly unhinged. First came the flowers. Massive bouquets delivered to our house every day with cards addressed to Dylan. I'm sorry, sweetheart. Grandma loves you. Please forgive me, my precious boy. I made terrible mistakes, but I'll do anything to fix them. Dylan threw the first few arrangements directly into the trash. By day 4, he was just leaving them on the porch to die. She's not getting it, he said, watching through the window as another delivery truck pulled up. I don't want her apologies. I want her to leave us alone. But Carol wasn't capable of leaving us alone. The flowers were followed by packages, expensive video games, clothes, electronics. Everything Dylan had ever mentioned wanting, all arriving with increasingly desperate notes. She thinks she can buy her way back, Dylan said, looking at the latest box with disgust. She's doing exactly what you always said she did, trying to solve problems with money and presents. I called her that evening, my patience completely exhausted. Carol, you need to stop sending things to my house. I just want him to know I care. Her voice was shrill, manic. I can't bear the thought of him hating me forever. Then you should have thought about that before you spent 3 years manipulating him against me. I've apologized. I've admitted I was wrong. What more does he want from me? Time, Carol. He wants time to process what you did to him. And you're not giving him that. But what if he never forgives me? What if I've lost him forever? The raw panic in her voice almost made me feel sorry for her. Almost. That's a consequence you'll have to live with, I said. Just like Dylan had to live with the consequences of trusting you. You can't keep him from me. I have grandparent rights. The words hit like a physical blow. Excuse me? I've been talking to a lawyer. In this state, grandparents have rights to visitation, especially when there's an established relationship. You can't just cut me out because you're angry. I felt the blood drain from my face. Carol, you wouldn't. I don't want to, but if it's the only way to see my grandson. I hung up and immediately started researching grandparent rights laws on my phone. What I found made my stomach churn. In our state, grandparents could indeed petition for visitation rights if they could prove an existing relationship and that contact was in the child's best interest. Dylan found me at the kitchen table an hour later, surrounded by printouts and legal websites. Mom? What's all this? Your grandmother is threatening to take us to court for visitation rights, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. The color drained from his face. She can do that? She can try. Whether she'd win is another question, but Dylan, a court case would mean lawyers, depositions, testimony. They might want to interview you about why you don't want to see her. I'd have to tell strangers about all the stuff she said about you. Probably. And she'd have a lawyer too, trying to make it sound like I'm the one being unreasonable. Dylan slumped into a chair, looking overwhelmed. This is all my fault. If I hadn't complained to her about you, if I hadn't let her say those things. Stop. This is not your fault. You were a kid trusting an adult who should have known better. But even as I said it, I could see Dylan withdrawing again, building those walls back up. The progress we'd made over the past few days was crumbling under the weight of Carol's escalating drama. My phone buzzed with another text from Carol. I don't want to involve the courts, but I won't lose my grandson over your vindictiveness. Call me. Then another. I raised Richard. I helped raise Dylan. I have rights. And finally, you have 24 hours to arrange a meeting, or I'm filing papers tomorrow. I showed Dylan the messages, and his face went hard in a way that reminded me painfully of the angry boy I dropped off at Carol's house a month ago. Let her try, he said coldly. I'll tell any judge exactly what kind of grandmother she really is. But I could hear the fear underneath his defiance, and I realized that Carol's threats were undoing everything we'd worked to rebuild. She was forcing Dylan back into survival mode, back into anger and mistrust, just when we were starting to heal. The woman who'd spent 3 years poisoning our relationship was now threatening to drag us through legal hell to force her way back into our lives. And the worst part? She probably thought she was doing it out of love. I was still staring at Carol's threatening texts when Dylan suddenly stood up from the table, his face set with grim determination. I want to call her, he said. Dylan, I don't think that's a good idea right now. No, Mom. I'm tired of everyone making decisions about my life without asking me. Grandma wants to drag us to court. Fine. But first she's going to hear exactly what I think about that. Before I could stop him, he'd grabbed my phone and hit Carol's number. She answered on the first ring. Jennifer? Oh, thank goodness, I was hoping you'd. It's Dylan, he said, his voice flat and cold. And I have something to say to you. The silence on the other end stretched for several seconds. When Carol spoke again, her voice was trembling. Dylan? Oh, sweetheart, I've missed you so much. Stop. The word came out like a slap. Just stop with the fake grandma voice. I know who you really are now. Honey, I know you're upset, but if we could just sit down and talk. About what? About how you're going to force me to see you even though I don't want to? About how you're threatening to take my mom to court. Dylan's voice was rising, and I could see his hands shaking with anger. Do you know what you've done to us? I'm trying to fix things. I'm trying to make amends. By threatening us? By sending cops to our house? By trying to use lawyers to force me to forgive you? Dylan laughed, but there was no humor in it. You haven't changed at all, Grandma. You're still trying to control everything. That's not fair, Dylan. I love you. No, you don't. The words came out quiet but devastating. You love the idea of me. You love having a grandson who thinks you're better than his mom. But you don't actually love me, because if you did, you'd respect what I'm telling you right now. I could hear Carol crying through the phone. Please don't say that. Please, I can't bear. You can't bear it? How do you think I felt when I realized you'd been lying to me for 3 years? How do you think my mom felt every time you told me she was the problem? Dylan's composure was cracking, real pain bleeding through the anger. You made me hate the one person who actually loves me enough to discipline me when I'm being a brat. I was wrong. I know I was wrong. And now you think you can just force everything back to normal? You think some judge is going to make me sit in your living room and pretend to love you? Dylan's voice broke slightly. All that's going to do is make me hate you even more. Dylan, please, I just want a chance. I gave you a chance. I lived with you for 3 days, remember? And you know what I learned? You don't actually know how to love anyone. You only know how to spoil people so they'll like you better than someone else. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. I could hear Carol sobbing clearly now, harsh and broken. If you take us to court, Dylan continued, his voice steadying again, I will tell them everything. Every lie you told me about Mom. Every time you bought me something just to make her look bad. Every time you undermined her rules and then acted innocent. And then I'll ask the judge if that sounds like someone who should be forced into a 12-year-old's life. Dylan. Don't call us again, Grandma. Don't send presents. Don't send flowers. Don't send police. And if you file those papers, I'll make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of grandmother you really are. He hung up and immediately burst into tears. But even through his sobs, I could see something had shifted. Dylan had found his voice, not the defiant anger he'd used before, but something clear and certain and his own. Carol's phone started ringing again immediately. This time, I turned it off and put my arms around my son. 2 days after Dylan's devastating phone call to Carol, I thought we finally won. The flowers stopped coming. The packages stopped arriving. My phone stayed blissfully quiet. I should have known it was too good to be true. The knock on our door came at 7 p.m. on Thursday, just as Dylan and I were settling in to watch a movie together, something we hadn't done in months. Real quality time, not the careful politeness we'd been navigating, but actual comfortable mother-son time. I'll get it, I said, pausing the movie. Probably just a delivery. But when I opened the door, Richard stood on my porch. My ex-husband looked exactly the same as he had 3 years ago, still handsome in that generic way that had attracted me in college, still wearing expensive clothes that screamed successful businessman. But there was something different in his expression, something harder than the usual detached disappointment he wore when dealing with his old life. Hello, Jennifer. We need to talk. Richard? What are you doing here? You live in Portland now, remember? My mother called me. He stepped closer to the door, and I instinctively moved to block his view into the house. She told me some very concerning things about what's been happening with Dylan. My stomach dropped. Carol called you? She's worried sick, Jennifer. She says you're keeping Dylan from seeing her, that you've turned him against the whole family. She mentioned police visits and lawyers. Behind me, I heard Dylan's footsteps. Mom? Who's at the? He stopped dead when he saw his father. Dad? The hope in Dylan's voice broke my heart. Despite everything Richard had put us through, despite 3 years of broken promises and missed calls, Dylan still lit up when he saw his father. Hey, buddy. Richard's voice softened slightly. I came to check on you. Grandma Carol is really worried. You came because of Grandma? The hope in Dylan's voice flickered into confusion. Not because you wanted to see me? Richard had the grace to look uncomfortable. Of course I wanted to see you. But Dylan, your grandmother is family. You can't just cut her out because you're going through a difficult phase. A difficult phase? I couldn't keep the incredulity out of my voice. Richard, do you have any idea what your mother did to our family? She told me her side of things, yes. And honestly, Jennifer, it sounds like you might be overreacting. Mom has always been devoted to Dylan. Devoted to undermining me, you mean? See, this is exactly what she was talking about. Richard crossed his arms, slipping into that condescending tone I remembered so well. You're being emotional and vindictive instead of thinking about what's best for Dylan. Emotional and vindictive? The words hit like a slap. Richard, your mother spent 3 years telling Dylan that I was a bitter, controlling parent because you left us. She systematically poisoned my relationship with my own son so she could be the favorite. That's not how she tells it. Of course it's not. I could feel my voice rising, but I didn't care. Did she mention the part where she told Dylan that divorced mothers take their anger out on their kids? Did she mention buying him expensive presents to make me look cheap? Did she mention telling him he didn't have to follow my rules because I was just being mean? Richard looked past me to Dylan, who was standing frozen in the hallway. Dylan, is that true? Dylan's face went through a series of expressions, surprise, hurt, and then something that looked like resignation. You don't believe Mom, do you? Even when she's telling the truth, you think she's lying. I'm not calling anyone a liar, son. I'm just trying to understand what happened. What happened is that Grandma Carol made me think Mom was a bad parent for 3 years, and when I finally found out the truth, I didn't want to see her anymore. Dylan's voice was steady, but I could see his hands clenching. And instead of respecting that, she's been harassing us and threatening to sue us, and now she called you to come fix it. Dylan, sometimes adults make mistakes. Stop. Dylan held up his hand, and I was shocked by the authority in his voice. Dad, you left 3 years ago. You moved across the country and started a new family. You miss my birthday, you forget to call, and the only reason you're standing here right now is because Grandma called you to complain about Mom. Richard's face flushed. That's not fair. You know the divorce was complicated. The divorce was 3 years ago, Dad. This is about now. This is about the fact that you don't actually know what's been going on in my life, but you're here to tell Mom she's handling it wrong. I stared at my son in amazement. When had he become this articulate? When had he learned to see through manipulation so clearly? Dylan, I'm still your father. Then act like it. The words exploded out of Dylan with such force that Richard actually stepped backward. Don't show up here because your mom is upset. Show up because you miss me. Call me because you want to hear about my day, not because someone told you to. The porch fell silent except for Dylan's heavy breathing and the distant sound of traffic. Richard cleared his throat, looking uncomfortable. Maybe we should all sit down and discuss this calmly. No, Dylan said firmly. You can discuss it with Mom if you want, but I'm done. I'm done with adults who only pay attention to me when it's convenient for them. He turned and walked back into the house, leaving Richard and me standing in the doorway staring at each other. Well, Richard said finally. He's gotten quite opinionated. He's gotten quite honest, I corrected. There's a difference. But as Richard and I stood there in the growing darkness, I realized this wasn't over. Carol had played her trump card by involving Richard, and now I was facing both of them. The united front I'd never had to deal with during my marriage was finally forming, just in time to tear apart the progress Dylan and I had made. Richard spent the next hour trying to convince me that I was damaging Dylan's relationship with his extended family and that I needed to facilitate healing between Dylan and Carol. The same man who hadn't called his son in 6 weeks was suddenly an expert on family relationships. Jennifer, you're being unreasonable, he said for the 10th time, sitting in my living room like he still belonged there. Whatever happened between you and my mother, Dylan shouldn't suffer for it. Dylan isn't suffering, I said, my patience finally snapping. Dylan is finally free from someone who was manipulating him. The only person suffering here is Carol, because she lost her emotional pawn. That's an awful thing to say about my mother. It's an awful thing that she did to our son. Richard sighed dramatically. Look, I'll talk to her. I'll make sure she apologizes properly. But you have to meet her halfway here. No, I don't. I stood up, done with this conversation. Richard, you chose to leave this family. You don't get to come back 3 years later and tell me how to fix problems you weren't here to prevent. I'm Dylan's father. Then start acting like one. Dylan appeared in the doorway, his face blazing with anger. You want to fix something, Dad? Call me on my birthday next month. Remember when I have soccer games. Ask me about school instead of just asking if I'm being good for Mom. Richard's face went red. Dylan, that's enough. No, it's not enough. Dylan stepped fully into the room, and I could see 3 years of hurt pouring out of him. You know what Grandma Carol told me? She said you left because Mom was too angry and difficult. She said you'd probably come back if Mom was nicer. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. She said what? She told me lots of stuff about why you got divorced. About how Mom was bitter and mean and that's why you found someone else. Dylan's voice cracked. I spent 2 years thinking maybe if I could make Mom less angry, you'd come home. Richard went pale. Dylan, I never asked her to say those things. But you didn't stop her, did you? Dylan wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. Just like you're not stopping her now. You show up here to defend her instead of asking me if I'm okay. I did ask if you were okay. No, Dad. You asked if Mom was keeping me from Grandma. That's different. The room fell silent except for the sound of Dylan's quiet crying. My heart was breaking for him all over again, not just for what Carol had done, but for the father who kept disappointing him. Richard stood up slowly. Maybe I should go back to the hotel and we can discuss this tomorrow. Don't bother, Dylan said quietly. Just go back to Portland, Dad. Go back to your real family. The one that's easier to love. Dylan, that's not. Yes, it is. Dylan looked up at his father with devastating clarity. And you know what? I'm okay with that now. Because I have a mom who actually shows up. Who fights for me even when I'm being awful. Who doesn't give up on me when things get hard. He turned to me, his eyes bright with tears but also with something that looked like peace. Mom, I'm sorry it took me so long to see that. I'm sorry I believed all those lies about you. You're a good mom. You're my mom. And that's enough. As Richard left that night, tail between his legs, I realized something had fundamentally shifted. Dylan had found his voice, chosen his side, and learned the difference between love and manipulation. We were finally home.